The precise hum of the server racks provided a constant, low-frequency backdrop to Marcus's existence. He preferred it to human chatter. His current research, an exhaustive analysis of obscure agrarian tax records from the late 17th century, demanded absolute focus, a commodity scarce in most populated environments. Here, within the windowless, temperature-regulated confines of the research station archives, interruption was rare. He was a historian, a meticulous cataloger of forgotten facts, and his reclusive nature suited the profession. A sharp, uncharacteristic chime sliced through the steady drone. Marcus paused, his fingers hovering over a brittle parchment. The digital display of his secure terminal pulsed. An external call. He rarely received them. His contact list was minimal, reserved for academic colleagues and the occasional, unavoidable administrative figure. He accepted the connection. "Marcus Thorne?" A voice, dry and reedy, inquired. "Speaking," Marcus replied, his own tone betraying no inflection. "This is Arthur Finch, solicitor for the late Eleanor Vance. I regret to inform you of him passing." Marcus blinked. Eleanor Vance. The name registered dimly. A distant relative, a great-aunt perhaps, whom he had met once, decades ago, at a family gathering he had tried to erase from his memory. He offered a polite, detached acknowledgement. "Him will has been executed," the solicitor continued, oblivious to Marcus's lack of emotional response. "And in an unexpected turn, you have been named the sole inheritor of him primary estate, Blackwood Manor." A silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant whir of the research station's cooling systems. Marcus felt no surge of emotion, merely a detached processing of information. A manor. He had no need for a manor. His modest apartment, stacked high with books and primary sources, suited him perfectly. Blackwood Manor, he repeated, the name tasting like dust. He knew of it, of course. Not personally, but historically. Its reputation preceded it, a tangle of local folklore and whispered tragedies. A dark history, steeped in peculiar incidents and inexplicable disappearances. He had always dismissed such narratives as the product of rural isolation and superstitious minds, exaggerations perpetuated by those who preferred myth to mundane fact. "The property is extensive," the solicitor elaborated, "and quite isolated. There are, of course, certain legends associated with it. But I assure you, these are merely local curiosities. I've sent the complete documentation to your secure email. We can arrange for a visit at your earliest convenience." Marcus agreed, the word legends resonating with an almost imperceptible hum of annoyance. He concluded the call, his attention already shifting from the deceased relative to the potential historical value of the property itself. A manor of that age would undoubtedly possess a rich, documented past. He would approach it as a research project, an architectural and social history, nothing more. His skepticism was a shield, honed by years of academic rigor. He would uncover the truth, dismantle the superstitious narratives brick by brick, just as he would eventually dismantle any physical clutter the manor might contain. 2 weeks later, the journey to Blackwood Manor was a descent into increasing remoteness. The paved roads gave way to gravel, then to a track barely wider than his vehicle. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of tires on loose stone and the occasional, unsettling rustle in the undergrowth that was never quite identifiable. When the manor finally materialized through a break in the foliage, it was not a grand reveal, but an emergence, as if the structure had simply been waiting patiently for his arrival. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, clawed its way up the walls, consuming windows and blurring architectural lines. The slate roof sagged in places, a testament to centuries of neglect. No light emanated from its numerous windows, which stared out like vacant eyes. The wind, when it stirred, carried the faint, cloying scent of something indefinable. Old wood, damp stone, and a deeper, more unsettling aroma, like stagnant air from a tomb. The front door, a massive slab of oak studded with iron, bore the marks of time and weather. The lock mechanism groaned in protest as he inserted the key provided by the solicitor, a weighty, antique piece of forged metal. He pushed the door inward. It swung open with a sigh that seemed to originate from the very foundations of the house, releasing a wave of frigid, stale air. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light that managed to penetrate the grimy windows, illuminated like microscopic, frantic organisms. The air inside was heavier, thicker, carrying a more potent iteration of the outdoor scent. A complex tapestry of mildew, forgotten textiles, and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like ancient dried blood. Marcus stepped across the threshold, his boots thudding softly on the flagstone floor. The sound was swallowed instantly by the cavernous space. He stood in a great hall, its vaulted ceiling lost in gloom. Cobwebs, thick and gray, draped like funeral shrouds from every corner. It was not merely old. It felt profoundly aware. He dismissed the thought immediately. It was merely the accumulation of age, the settled dust of centuries. He was a historian, not a mystic. He was determined to strip away the veneer of superstition and expose the mundane mechanics of its past. The ancient manor loomed, a silhouette of weathered stone against a bruised sky. Marcus surveyed the main hall, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow, the air thick with the scent of dust and damp earth. His initial assessment of its historical significance remained unchallenged. This structure was a tangible link to centuries past. He had arranged for the delivery of his extensive collection of research materials, and now, a small army of cardboard boxes crammed with texts, microfiches, and recording equipment occupied a corner of the cavernous space. He selected a large, relatively well-lit room off the main hall, its tall windows overlooking a neglected garden. The room, once perhaps a library or a study, offered an expansive table of dark, scarred oak, perfect for spreading out documents. This would be his temporary base of operations, his research station. Unpacking commenced with methodical precision. He aligned stacks of monographs on local history, arranged a portable scanner, and connected a lamp to a crackling old outlet. He attributed it to the old window panes, perhaps a subtle shift in the wind outside. He ignored the prickle on his neck and continued, his focus absolute. He spread out genealogical charts, cross-referencing names from the manor's deed with local burial records. The task was absorbing, a logical puzzle that demanded his full intellect. Hours later, the lamp cast a focused pool of light on his work, the rest of the room receding into gloom. He stretched, his back protesting the long hours bent over the table. Marcus straightened, listening. He dismissed it as the house settling, old timbers groaning under the weight of time. The manor was old, after all. Such noises were to be expected. Now it was nestled beneath a much larger tome on agricultural practices of the 17th century. He frowned. A momentary lapse, perhaps. Fatigue was a deceptive thing, capable of blurring memory. He shivered, pulling his sleeves down. The heating system, if it even existed, was clearly inadequate. Days bled into a routine of meticulous study. The manor's history was vast and intricate, a tapestry woven with local gentry, forgotten tragedies, and tantalizing gaps. He was particularly interested in a period in the late 18th century when the manor seemed to change hands with alarming frequency, often ending in the sudden departure or unexplained demise of its occupants. Local records were frustratingly vague, often citing melancholia or unfortunate circumstances. The subtle phenomena persisted, growing incrementally bolder. He'd leave a pen on the right side of his ledger, only to find it later resting perfectly centered. The heavy, ornate brass letter opener he used as a paperweight would occasionally be found several inches from its original position, as if nudged. He rationalized these occurrences with increasing effort. The manor had an uneven floor, perhaps. He was simply moving things subconsciously in his deep concentration. The house was settling. Drafts, old wiring, the creaks of old wood. One evening, while searching for a misplaced index card, his hand brushed against a loose panel in the wall behind a built-in bookshelf. Curiosity overriding his impatience, he pried it open. Inside, tucked into a dusty recess, lay a stack of yellowed, brittle letters tied with a faded velvet ribbon and a small, leather-bound journal. The journal belonged to a previous occupant, a woman named Eleanor, dated from the early 19th century. Her elegant, looping script filled the pages, initially detailing mundane household affairs and social visits. I dream of rooms I do not recognize. Corridors that twist and turn without end. I wake to the distinct impression of being watched, though the chamber is empty. October 19th. The master of the house. He seems different. Distant. His eyes hold a new, unsettling light. He speaks of the influence, of the hunger. I fear for his sanity and for my own. Marcus frowned, his brow furrowed in concentration. The language was overwrought, dramatic, typical of the era. He hypothesized a severe case of isolation-induced paranoia, perhaps exacerbated by a pre-existing melancholic temperament. The master's descent into madness, if true, would only have fueled her own anxieties. He recognized the pattern. A mind under duress, fabricating threats where none existed. He turned to the letters, their content even more disturbing. One passage stood out, its elegant script trembling at the edges. It knows. It takes. My memories. They fray at the edges like old lace. I forget faces, names, the house. He ran a hand over the words, the ink so faint it was barely legible. He considered the possibility of lead poisoning from the paint, or perhaps a familial predisposition to mental illness. He closed the journal, placing it carefully beside the letters. The old manor held its secrets, certainly, but they were secrets of human frailty, not supernatural machinations. He was convinced of it. Almost. The faint script on the wall continued to occupy Marcus's thoughts. He had spent another hour in the library, tracing the delicate lines, attempting to decipher the faded script beneath the layers of aged paint. The words, fragments of a personal lament, offered no definitive answers, only a pervasive sense of sorrow. He considered the possibility of lead poisoning from the old paint, a tangible scientific explanation for potential cognitive distortions. The first whisper was indistinguishable from the creak of settling timbers. Marcus was in the great hall, examining a series of faded tapestries depicting a hunt. A low murmur, like dry leaves skittering across stone, brushed against his ear. He turned, expecting to see a draft disturbing a curtain, but the heavy velvet hung still. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than before. He attributed it to the acoustic peculiarities of the vast space, the way sound could distort and echo in an ancient structure. He continued his examination, his fingers tracing the coarse weave of the tapestry, the threads stiff with age. Later that evening, as he sorted through a collection of brittle ledgers in what he had designated as his personal research station, a large oak-paneled room on the second floor, filled with tall bookshelves and a massive dust-laden desk, the sounds became more distinct. A soft sigh emanating from the wall directly behind him. He froze, pen poised over a yellowed page. The sound was not a draft, nor a settling beam. It was too deliberate, too human. Nothing. He rationalized it as auditory pareidolia, his mind imposing meaning onto random noise. The isolation was beginning to play tricks. He would turn his head sharply, only to find the hallway empty, the light from his lantern casting long, unwavering figures. He blamed eye strain from hours spent deciphering archaic script, or the unreliable glow of the manor's aging electrical system. Yet the frequency of these phantom movements increased. A shape like a hunched figure in the corner of his study, dissipating the moment his gaze met it. The nightmares were not abstract fears, but vivid, visceral encounters. He dreamt of suffocating dust, of being buried alive beneath layers of forgotten history. He found himself listening, straining to hear something beyond the rhythm of his own breathing. But there was only the vast, empty quiet. Driven by a growing unease he refused to acknowledge as fear, Marcus intensified his research. He meticulously cross-referenced property deeds, family trees, and local archives. The air here felt thick, as if the very paper he handled held a concentrated essence of its past. He found what he sought, though the discovery brought no comfort. The manor had a history of attracting reclusive individuals, scholars, and artists, people drawn to its isolation. And for many of them, the story ended in madness, disappearance, or suicide. He saw mentions of residents becoming withdrawn, their rationality eroding, their perceptions fracturing. The detached clinical historian was observing himself, now a subject in a terrifying, unfolding experiment. The house was not merely old, it was a participant. Marcus sat hunched over the heavy oak table in what he had designated his research station. The room, once a grand study, now served as his solitary command center in the ongoing siege against superstition. He had fortified himself with logic, but the walls of his certainty felt increasingly porous. The recurring themes from his previous research, voices, shadows, a creeping dread, now resonated with an unsettling familiarity. He had cataloged the decline of previous inhabitants, their rationality eroding, their perceptions fracturing. He recalled his own recent experiences, the whispers, the fleeting forms. He dismissed them still as the products of fatigue, isolation, and a mind overstimulated by morbid history. He reached for a brittle, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and smelling faintly of dried lavender and something metallic, like old blood. As his fingers traced the faint, spidery script of a long-dead occupant, a sudden, piercing wail echoed, not from the manor's depths, but within his own skull. It was a woman's cry, sharp with anguish, then abruptly cut short. Marcus flinched, his hand recoiling from the journal as if burned. The sound had been so immediate, so visceral, that his body reacted before his intellect could process it. He told himself it was an auditory hallucination, a pressure in his sinuses, perhaps. But the lingering echo in his ears, the tremor in his hands, defied easy dismissal. He resumed his seat, forcing his focus back to the documents, but the air in the room had shifted. It felt denser, charged with an unseen tension. He felt watched, not by a presence in the room, but by the very fabric of the manor itself. Later that evening, as dusk bled into the manor's cavernous spaces, Marcus found himself in the main hall. He intended to retrieve a forgotten volume from a high shelf. Then, without warning, the air shimmered before him. It was not a distortion of light, but a brief, vibrant overlay of another moment in time. Her silk gown, a deep emerald, billowed around her as she collided with the grand staircase balustrade. He could almost smell the faint perfume she wore, the metallic tang that had been on the journal. The vision lasted only a few seconds, vivid and horrifying, then vanished as abruptly as it had appeared, leaving only the dust-laden hall and the deepening gloom. Marcus stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. This was a memory, replayed with terrifying clarity. His clinical detachment began to unravel, thread by painstaking thread. He had always believed in the objective truth of history, in records, in verifiable facts. But what was this? A visual and emotional record imprinted on the very stone and wood? The sensation of being watched intensified. He felt the manor's presence not as an empty space, but as a vast, conscious entity. It was not merely observing him, it was consuming him. His thoughts, usually sharp and precise, felt sluggish, muddied by an influx of foreign emotions, despair, panic, a profound sense of entrapment. He retreated to his research station, the only place he felt even a semblance of control. But even there, the walls seemed to breathe. The faint metallic scent returned, stronger now, mingling with the must of old paper. He heard the distant, muffled sound of a child weeping, a sound so forlorn it pierced him. He pressed his palms against his temples, fighting the onslaught, trying to anchor himself to his own reality. He was not a grieving woman, nor a terrified child, but the house insisted. It pulsed with a quiet, insidious malevolence, replaying its horrors, not just for him to witness, but to experience. He felt a subtle draining, a part of him being drawn out, an invasive presence intertwining with his own consciousness. The manor was not merely haunted. It was a vast, sentient repository of suffering, and he, Marcus, was its current, unwilling conduit. Days blurred into a continuous cycle of reading, annotating, and the occasional, restless pacing. He rarely left the manor now. The thought of stepping beyond its gates, of engaging with the world outside, felt increasingly burdensome, an unnecessary expenditure of dwindling energy. He had initially intended a brief trip into the nearest town for supplies, perhaps a fresh change of clothes, and a proper meal not prepared by his own weary hands. The car keys lay on the sideboard in the main hall, a forgotten relic. The research, he reasoned, was paramount. Everything else could wait. A faint grumble from his stomach reminded him of his neglect. He hadn't eaten properly in what felt like days. A half-eaten tin of biscuits and a lukewarm mug of instant coffee constituted his last meal. He pushed the thought aside, his gaze fixed on a faded map of the manor grounds, dated 1782. An anomaly in the property lines, a jagged, unnatural distortion near the oldest wing, caught his eye. It seemed to pulse with a subtle, unreadable significance. He reached for his mobile phone, a modern anachronism amidst the parchment and brittle leather. He needed to verify something with the estate agent, a detail about the initial property transfer. The screen glowed, a cold blue rectangle in the dim room. He tapped the contact. The call connected, then immediately dropped. He tried again. No signal. He walked to the window, holding the device aloft, angling it this way and that. Nothing. A faint static hiss was the only response. He frowned. The signal had been weak, but present when he first arrived. Now a complete void. He moved to the drawing room, where the landline sat on a small mahogany table. It was an old model, provided by the estate. He lifted the receiver. A dial tone blessedly greeted him. He punched in the number for the estate agent. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a click. He tried a friend's number, then a general information line. Each time, the same sequence. Rings, then a click, then that low, pervasive hum. It was as if the wires themselves were absorbing the communication, redirecting it into the manor's unseen infrastructure. A strange calm settled over him as he replaced the receiver. A part of him, the rational, skeptical historian, felt a prickle of frustration, a surge of irritation at the malfunctioning equipment. But another, deeper part, one that had begun to unfurl within him these past weeks, felt a peculiar sense of relief. The outside world, with its demands and distractions, felt distant, irrelevant. Here, within these walls, there was only the manor and its secrets. And him. He returned to the research station, the cold air from the leaded panes doing little to rouse him from his growing lethargy. His clothes felt heavy, slightly damp with a persistent, earthy smell that clung to everything in the house. He hadn't changed them in days, perhaps longer. His beard had grown unruly, a tangled mess against his jaw. He felt its presence, a subtle pressure in the air, a constant hum that resonated not in his ears, but in his bones. It was a possessiveness he recognized now, a quiet claim. And disturbingly, it was not entirely unwelcome. The pervasive stillness, the lack of external intrusion, had begun to feel like a strange comfort, a cocoon shielding him from the anxieties of a world he no longer wished to inhabit. He was tired, profoundly so. But the thought of rest seemed less appealing than the prospect of another hour spent deciphering a faded script. The house beckoned him deeper into its forgotten corners, into its very essence, and he, Marcus, felt an unshakable, if weary, compulsion to obey. The outside world could wait. The manor, he understood, would not. The room, once a grand antechamber, now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a temporary command post in a siege. His shoulders ached with a persistent, dull throb that had become a constant companion, a physical manifestation of the relentless hours he poured into the manor's convoluted past. He wiped a hand across his jaw, feeling the abrasive stubble. How long had it been since he shaved? He couldn't recall with any certainty. A faint, cloying scent, like damp earth mixed with desiccated flowers, permeated the air, clinging to the yellowed pages and settling in the back of his throat. He pushed a leather-bound volume aside, its cover flaking under his touch, and pulled a tattered journal closer. The handwriting within was spidery, almost illegible, but a desperate urgency bled from every stroke. He squinted, tracing the faded ink with a fingertip. The entry was dated nearly 2 centuries prior. The walls breathe, they shift. I saw it. The passage to the solarium, it was gone, replaced by a blank expanse of stone. They say I am unwell, but I know what I saw. This place, it consumes more than just light. Marcus scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. Paranoia, delirium, the predictable decline of a mind isolated within these very walls. He had read similar accounts in other documents. The manor's previous inhabitants frequently succumbed to what the local records vaguely termed melancholia, or the vapors. He was different. He was a historian, a rationalist. He would not be swayed by spectral whispers or architectural illusions. He stood, stretching his cramped limbs. The floorboards beneath his feet groaned in protest, a sound he had grown accustomed to, like the sigh of a sleeping leviathan. He needed water, something cold and sharp to cut through the dryness in his mouth. He moved towards the door, the one that led to the central corridor. Had the door always been set so far back into the wall? It seemed to recede, nestled deeper than he remembered, almost shy. He dismissed it. Fatigue, nothing more. He pulled the door open and stepped into the corridor. He turned right, towards where the kitchen should be. But the corridor stretched, interminable, its tapestries hanging limp and heavy, absorbing the dim light from the distant window. He walked, his footsteps echoing unnervingly, the sound seeming to come from ahead of him, then behind. The silence was profound, broken only by the creak of the ancient house. He walked further and further still, but the turn he expected, the familiar archway leading to the kitchen wing, never appeared. He stopped, turning slowly. The door to the research station was no longer visible. He had walked only a few paces, surely. He spun again, his gaze sweeping the endless hall. No archway, no kitchen, no research station door. He was disoriented, yes, but this was beyond simple disorientation. He retraced his steps, or what he believed were his steps, his pace quickening. Panic began to claw at the edges of his composure. He found no door, no familiar landmark. The corridor was a seamless, unending loop. This was impossible. He knew this house. He had studied its blueprints, walked its halls countless times. He closed his eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and opened them again. The corridor remained unchanged, a mocking testament to his bewilderment. With a sudden, desperate resolve, he turned and marched back in the direction he had initially taken, forcing himself to ignore the rising tide of fear. He counted his steps, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He must have simply missed it. He was tired, dehydrated, hallucinating, perhaps. And then, abruptly, he was standing before the door to the research station. It was exactly as he remembered it. Recessed slightly, the brass knob gleaming dully, The corridor now seemed perfectly normal, the kitchen archway visible in the distance. He stumbled back into the research station, slamming the door shut with a resounding thud that echoed through the silent room. He leaned against it, his chest heaving, his mind reeling. He wasn't tired. He wasn't dehydrated. The house, it had moved. It had twisted. He pushed away from the door and collapsed into his chair, his gaze falling back to the open journal. He picked it up, his hands trembling. He reread the entry, the spidery script now seeming to pulse with a malevolent energy. This wasn't just a similar experience. The words resonated with an unnerving precision, echoing the frantic thrumming in his own skull. He looked at his own hand, then back at the faded ink. Had he written this? Had he, Marcus, scrawled these desperate words on these crumbling pages? The thought was absurd, yet it clung, a burr in his consciousness. He stared at the journal, then at his reflection in the leaded pane, a distorted, pale face staring back. For a fleeting, horrifying instant, it wasn't his face he saw. The reflection flickered, then solidified back into his own image. But the impression lingered, a phantom limb of identity. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his fists against his temples. This was the house. This was its work. It wasn't just playing tricks with architecture. It was playing tricks with memory, with self. The line between Marcus, the historian, and the forgotten, frantic inhabitants of the past was not merely blurring. It was dissolving. He opened his eyes. The journal lay before him, its words a direct accusation, a confession he was not sure was his own. He was trapped, not just within its shifting walls, but within its labyrinthine past, his very identity unraveling thread by thread. This was the house. This was its work. The line between Marcus, the historian, and the forgotten, frantic inhabitants of the past was not. It dissolved. The faces of the long dead, the echoes of their whispered fears, they didn't just haunt the periphery of his awareness. They burrowed into the core of it, grafting themselves onto his own recollections. This was more than a haunting. It was a parasitic intrusion. He needed an anchor, something concrete, irrefutable. His historical method demanded it. He remembered an obscure footnote in a local archive, referencing a private study facility established by one of the manor's more eccentric, academically inclined proprietors in the late 18th century. Now it glimmered with desperate possibility. A place free from the manor's immediate influence, perhaps. The drive was long, the gravel road giving way to a barely discernible track through overgrown fields. The air grew colder, even though the sky was a flat, uninspired gray. He found it eventually, nestled deep within a copse of skeletal oaks. A low stone structure, utterly devoid of charm. It resembled a fortified shed more than a scholarly retreat. The windows were boarded, the heavy wooden door warped and peeling. Rust stained the hinges, leaving streaks like dried blood. This was the research station. The lock, surprisingly, yielded to a robust kick. The interior was a single long room, lined with shelves of empty specimen jars, tarnished brass instruments, and stacks of leather-bound ledgers. A heavy oak desk dominated the far end, its surface littered with brittle yellow documents. Marcus moved with a historian's reverence, but also with a growing sense of unease. He lit the lantern he had brought, its pale glow struggling against the gloom. He began sifting through the papers on the desk. They were the meticulous records of the proprietor, dated from 1788 to 1801. Early entries detailed meteorological observations, soil analyses, and detailed sketches of local flora and fauna. The hand was precise, confident. But as Marcus turned the pages, a subtle shift became apparent. The entries began to focus almost exclusively on the manor itself. Observations on subject Delta 7, one read, referring to a new servant. Then, simply, Delta 7 deceased. Cause, unknown, consistent with previous subjects. Marcus's fingers trembled. This wasn't some madman's rambling. This was a systematic record, a horrifyingly detached account of what he was experiencing. The proprietor had been studying the manor's effects, not just on people, but on animals, even plants. There were notes on how flowers brought into the manor wilted faster, how caged birds grew listless and died. He found a small, locked drawer beneath the desk. With effort, he pried it open. Inside lay a single slender journal, its cover unmarked. This one was different. The hand was less steady, the ink faded in places, as if written in haste or exhaustion. This was the proprietor's personal account. "It is not a spirit," Marcus read, the words leaping from the page, "nor a curse. It is a hunger, an entity ancient and insidious, rooted in the very stones of Blackwood Manor. It does not merely haunt, it consumes. Memories, emotions, the very spark of life itself. The way the house seems to hum after a feeding. It grows stronger, more vibrant as its inhabitants fade. It draws sustenance from their fear, their despair, their very consciousness. It is a symbiotic horror, a living parasite that wears the guise of architecture." The proprietor's entries grew more frantic, the handwriting slanting wildly. "It knows I watch. It seeks to draw me back. The dreams. It tries to blur the lines, to make me one with those it has consumed. My own memories. They fray at the edges. I forget names, dates. His own recent experiences echoed in every line. The blurring, the merging of identities. It wasn't just a trick of the mind. It was a deliberate act of consumption." The final entry, barely legible, was dated only weeks before the proprietor's own disappearance, as noted in the local archives. "It watches me, even here. It knows my thoughts. It is patient, and it is hungry. Oh God, it is so hungry. Marcus am its next meal." The journal slipped from Marcus's numb fingers, clattering onto the dusty floor. He wasn't just a tenant, not just an inheritor, not just a researcher. He was prey. The house wasn't merely haunted. It was a living, malevolent entity, and he, Marcus, was its current, preferred meal. He was already being digested, his memories, his sanity, his very self, slowly dissolving into the ancient hunger of Blackwood Manor. The journal lay on the rough planks, a faded confession of a mind unraveling. Marcus stared at the final desperate lines, the ink blurring, not from his vision, but from the raw impact on his understanding. He was not merely observing the manor's predation. He was the prey, and the process was already well underway. The house was not just consuming, it was integrating. He was becoming a component, a memory, a fragment for its endless appetite. A cold dread, unlike any intellectual fear he had ever known, seized him. It was the terror of self-erasure, of his distinct consciousness dissolving into the collective, malevolent hum of the structure. His historian's detachment, once his shield, now felt like a fragile membrane, already stretched thin, threatening to tear. No. A surge of pure, unadulterated refusal. This was not an academic exercise, not a historical curiosity to be catalogued. He moved, a jerky, uncoordinated scramble. The air in the study felt thick, heavy with the house's watchful presence, a palpable pressure on his skin. He needed distance, clarity. The cool, damp air of the early morning struck his face, a bracing shock. He didn't stop, didn't look back at the looming, silent mass of the manor. His destination was the old stable block, a detached stone structure he had converted into his personal research station when he first arrived. It was less imposing, less alive than the main house, a place where his own order, his own intellect, still held sway. The space was a chaotic testament to his scholarship. Shelves overflowing with ancient texts, maps tacked to the walls, his own meticulously organized notes stacked in precarious towers. His hands trembled as he spread the journal across his workbench, scattering his own carefully indexed research. He grabbed other documents, old property deeds, architectural plans of the manor's earliest iterations, obscure local folklore collections. He scanned the journal again, his eyes darting across the desperate script, searching for any anomaly, any fragment of knowledge that could be weaponized. The house, he understood, fed on the living mind, on memory and sanity. It was a parasitic intelligence, but even parasites had weaknesses. What couldn't it consume? What would repel it? He flipped through a particularly dense volume on local agricultural history, a book he'd dismissed earlier as irrelevant. His fingers, now clumsy with adrenaline, brushed against a pressed, brittle flower tucked between two pages describing ancient land rights. He pulled it out. It was a forget-me-not, withered to a skeletal shadow of its former self, a curious inclusion in such a dry text. He remembered a fleeting mention in the journal, a cryptic phrase about the blue that remembers, but forgets. He'd dismissed it as poetic madness then. He reread the entry in the journal, the one immediately preceding the flower's placement in the historical text. The architect. He knew. The foundation of forgetting. The blue that remembers, but forgets. His gaze snapped to the architectural plans he had laid out. He knew the manor had been built upon a much older structure, perhaps even a sacred site. He pulled those towards him, flipping frantically. And then he saw it. A symbol. A stylized representation of the forget-me-not flower, repeated multiple times around what appeared to be the manor's original footprint. Next to it, a small, almost imperceptible symbol of a hand, turned palm outwards, surrounded by a faint, swirling aura. And a single stark word, barely legible. Repel. The reveal struck him with the force of a physical blow. The event was the realization that the manor's very foundation was designed to absorb and retain memories, a monstrous archive of consciousness. But the original architect, or perhaps an earlier forgotten culture, had also devised a countermeasure, a foundation of forgetting. The forget-me-not wasn't just a flower, it was a symbol, a key to a specific forgotten ritual of disruption. It implied a method to suppress the house's insatiable hunger, to sever its connection to the memories it had already consumed, or, terrifyingly, to prevent it from consuming more. And the flower, the blue that remembers but forgets, was not just a symbol, but perhaps a catalyst, a specific botanical agent used in conjunction with this mental act. He had found a weakness, a desperate chance. But the implication was clear. To perform this ritual, he would have to confront the house at its deepest, most fundamental level. He would have to enter its very heart, the oldest part of its foundation, the place where its malevolence was most concentrated. And he would have to do so while simultaneously attempting to empty his own mind, to become a vessel of deliberate forgetting, a target for the house's most aggressive attempts to consume him. The prospect was terrifying. It was a gamble with his sanity, his very soul. The air in the research station, once a sanctuary, now felt charged with a new, terrifying purpose. The air in the makeshift research station hummed with a tension that mirrored Marcus's own focus. The previous night's revelation, the desperate chance he'd unearthed, now propelled him. It wasn't a cure, but a temporary reprieve, a way to sever its hold, even if only for a short time. He laid out the components on the scarred oak table. Dried herbs, meticulously drawn sigils on aged parchment. A small, intricate carving of dark wood. His hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as he arranged them. He understood the profound risk. This wasn't just an academic exercise. It was a direct challenge to a sentient, malevolent entity. A deep groan resonated from the stone above, a sound unlike the usual creaks of an old building settling. It was lower, more resonant, like a vast submerged organ stirring. Marcus paused, his gaze lifting to the cellar ceiling. He cataloged the sound, noting its unusual timbre. The single bulb flickered, briefly plunging the station into near darkness before regaining its weak glow. A fine dust, dislodged by the vibration, sifted down onto his papers. He resumed his work, igniting a small brass censer. The herbal smoke, acrid and earthy, began to spiral upwards. As the first tendrils unfurled, a sharp crack echoed from the far end of the cellar. Marcus spun around. The heavy wooden door, which he had secured with a sturdy bolt, now stood ajar, a sliver of impenetrable blackness visible beyond. He had fastened it himself, ensuring it was locked tight. This was no draft. He moved towards the door, his hand instinctively reaching for the iron poker he kept near the defunct fireplace. The door swung inwards another inch, slowly, deliberately, as if pushed by an unseen hand. Marcus could discern no movement, no source for the push. He considered resecuring it, but a primal urge to confront the intrusion took hold. He gripped the poker tighter, his knuckles white. He turned back to the ritual components. The smoke from the censer, instead of rising, now swirled erratically, pulled downwards, then sideways, as if caught in an invisible, localized eddy. The sigils on the parchment began to shimmer faintly, the lines pulsing with an internal light that waxed and waned with the flickering bulb. A low, guttural murmur started, not from outside, but seemingly from the very stones of the cellar walls. Marcus felt a pressure building behind his eyes, a dull ache that intensified with each passing moment. He fought to maintain his focus, to remember the precise sequence of the ritual. Then, a figure solidified at the threshold of the open cellar door. It was translucent, indistinct at the edges, but its form was undeniably human-like, tall and gaunt. Its features were blurred, like a face seen through rippling water. Yet Marcus felt the weight of its gaze. It did not move, but simply stood, a silent, menacing sentinel. He had to act. As he did, a shriek tore through the cellar, a sound that seemed to flay the very air. He clapped a hand to his ear, his jaw clenching against the auditory assault. The only illumination came from the faint, pulsing glow of the sigils on the table and the dim, ethereal shimmer of the figure in the doorway. Marcus recognized voices, distorted and twisted from the manor's past. A child's sob, a man's furious shout, a woman's heartbroken sigh. They were his memories, or memories the house had implanted, now weaponized. He recoiled, his back hitting the rough stone wall. The house was fighting back, not just with atmosphere, but with intent. It wanted him to abandon the ritual, to succumb. He could feel its malevolence pressing in, seeking to crush his will, to absorb him entirely into its timeless, tormented fabric. He took a ragged breath, the acrid smoke filling his lungs. The house had shown him its weakness, and now he would exploit it no matter the cost. The ritual was not complete. He had converted the manor's oldest cellar into this space, lining the stone walls with hastily erected shelves for his documents and texts. A single bare bulb casting a harsh, unblinking light over his work. For weeks, the manor had gnawed at his perception, twisting shadows into specters and whispers into accusations. But here, amidst the brittle paper and fading ink, Marcus found a fragile anchor. His current obsession, a series of cryptic land deeds and a fragmented journal from the manor's original architect, suggested a deliberate, calculated malevolence embedded in the very foundations. Not a haunting, but a mechanism. A trap. He traced a faded diagram with a calloused finger. The architect, a man long forgotten by history, had meticulously described a subterranean chamber, a conduit, beneath the manor's oldest wing. The journal entries grew increasingly paranoid and disjointed as they neared the chamber's description, detailing a gathering of essences, a deep hunger. Marcus interpreted this as the core of the entity, the point where it consumed the memories and sanity of its inhabitants. His plan, born of desperate research and a chilling logical leap, was to disrupt this conduit. He believed he could sever its connection, starve it, or at the very least gain a moment of clarity. The bulb above flickered, momentarily plunging the research station into a suffocating blackness before sputtering back to life. Marcus ignored it. He had learned to filter the manor's petty torments. He gathered his meager tools, a heavy iron crowbar, a coil of thick rope, and a bundle of dried herbs tied with string, a historical detail he'd found in a local folklore collection, dismissed as superstition, but now clutched like a talisman. The cellar stairs groaned under his weight, each step a deliberate act against an unseen resistance. He moved through the manor's lower levels, past familiar rooms now twisted by the encroaching gloom. He heard the faint, insistent creak of floorboards above him, the murmur of voices he knew were not there, echoing fragments of forgotten conversations. The manor was protesting his intrusion, trying to deter him with its usual arsenal of psychological warfare. He reached a narrow, unmarked corridor he'd only recently discovered behind a crumbling plaster wall in the manor's oldest wing. The silence was not peaceful but oppressive, a vacuum that pressed against his eardrums. He pushed open a heavy, unadorned wooden door, its hinges screaming in protest. This was it. The architect's journal had described this specific entry point. Marcus lit a single, sputtering lantern he'd brought, its feeble glow barely piercing the gloom. The staircase felt ancient, worn smooth by countless forgotten feet. The walls were rough-hewn stone, sweating with moisture. After what felt like an eternity, the stairs opened into a vast, cavernous space. The room was not empty. In the center, a monumental stone pedestal rose from the floor, intricately carved with symbols Marcus didn't recognize, but which radiated an undeniable sense of malevolence. And upon it, or rather, within it, was the core. As Marcus drew closer, the light pulsed, and he saw them. Fleeting images, like shattered glass reflecting memories. A woman's laughing face, a child's outstretched hand, a man's terrified scream. These were not just echoes, they were being drawn in, stretched and distorted, like taffy into the shimmering maelstrom. The cloying sweetness in the air intensified, a sickening aroma of stolen life. Marcus's breath hitched. This was the raw, unadulterated hunger of the manor. It wasn't a metaphor. It was real, and it was actively devouring him, piece by agonizing piece. But he held fast, his grip tightening on the crowbar. He had come too far. He would not let it take everything. He approached the pedestal, the ground beneath his feet vibrating with a low, resonant hum. The swirling light pulsed faster, as if aware of his intention, its stolen memories flashing with increased intensity, trying to disorient him. He saw a distorted vision of his own face, screaming silently, trapped within the vortex. The manor was fighting back, directly, psychologically. It showed him his deepest fears, his greatest regrets, all twisted and amplified. He raised the crowbar, his hands trembling, but his resolve, though battered, remained. He had to sever this connection. He swung the crowbar, aiming for a specific, ancient-looking keystone in the pedestal, a detail from the architect's final desperate entries. The impact echoed through the chamber, a jarring metallic clang against stone. The manor was screaming. A faint, earthy scent, mingled with the dry dust of ancient paper and a subtle, metallic tang permeated the space. He ran a calloused thumb over the brittle page of a leather-bound journal, its script a spidery, precise hand from centuries past. The cold of the stone floor seeped through his boots, a constant physical reminder of the structure that surrounded him. His mind felt like a finely tuned instrument, stretched taut. Days had blurred into a seamless continuum of research, the outside world receding until it was merely a distant concept. The house's influence, once a subtle hum at the periphery of his consciousness, had intensified, manifesting as fleeting distortions in his peripheral vision, the occasional misplacement of an object he'd just held, or the unsettling sensation of voices whispering just beyond the threshold of hearing. He traced a passage in the journal, a cryptic entry from a former inhabitant. The walls remember. The true nature of the manor's malevolence had slowly solidified in his understanding. Piece by painstaking piece, a mosaic of despair and consumption. It did not merely destroy, it integrated. A tremor, faint but distinct, ran through the stone floor beneath him. He had found references to a specific architectural anomaly, a hidden chamber described only in oblique, terrified terms within the oldest surviving deeds. Not a chamber in the house, but a chamber of the house, a central nexus. The journal described it as the repository of echoes, a place where the house's sustenance was held. He understood with a dawning horror that the house did not merely feed on life force, it consumed identity. It absorbed the memories, the personalities, the very essence of its inhabitants, not to obliterate them, but to incorporate them, to make them part of its own evolving, monstrous consciousness. The past residents were not gone. They were here, within the walls, their fragmented experiences adding to the house's vast, terrifying internal landscape. He found it finally. A diagram, crudely drawn but unmistakably specific, illustrating a structural weakness, a point of confluence in the very foundation of the oldest section of the cellar. A single, crucial stone, described as the keystone of remembrance. The journal suggested that this keystone, if compromised, might momentarily disrupt the house's absorption process, perhaps even inflicting a wound. The thought was a desperate gamble, a clinical assessment of a supernatural threat. Marcus gripped the journal tighter, his knuckles white. The metallic tang in the air intensified, acrid and coppery. He could almost discern individual words, fragments of memory, assaulting his mind. He recognized a phrase he had read in a letter from a century ago, spoken by a child who had vanished within these walls. The house was pushing back, its vast, composite mind sensing his intent. He walked to the section of the wall indicated by the diagram. It was unremarkable, just another patch of rough-hewn stone. There was a faint warmth beneath the surface, a pulse. This was it. He retrieved a heavy iron chisel and a small sledgehammer he kept for opening stubborn crates. The tools felt unnervingly light in his hands. He positioned the chisel against the keystone, his breath catching in his throat. The voices surged, a wave of incoherent desperation, threatening to overwhelm his own thoughts. The house was trying to absorb him now, at this crucial moment, to prevent his action. He raised the sledgehammer. The very structure of the research station groaned, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through his bones. Dust rained down from the ceiling. He felt a profound sense of presence, an immense, ancient awareness focusing solely on him. His identity was dissolving, not slowly, but rapidly, like sugar in hot water. He saw flashes of other lives, other minds, images not his own, but now somehow part of him. A woman weeping by a window, a man scribbling frantically at a desk, a child chasing a phantom butterfly through the garden. They were all here, and he was joining them. With a primal surge of his remaining will, Marcus brought the sledgehammer down. The impact echoed like a gunshot in the confined space. A shower of stone dust erupted. A crack, thin and jagged, appeared on the keystone. Then, a profound silence fell. The tremor stopped. The metallic tang vanished. The air, for a fleeting moment, felt clean, empty. Marcus stood, panting, the sledgehammer heavy in his hand. He stared at the cracked stone, a sense of triumph warring with an overwhelming emptiness. He felt different. The clarity was unnerving. He could recall his name, his purpose, the sequence of events leading to this moment. Yet he also felt a vastness within him, a strange resonance. He perceived the research station not just as a room, but as a collection of countless moments, a tapestry woven from the lives that had passed through it. He could feel the woman weeping, the man scribbling, the child playing, all around him, within him. They were not memories, but presences now. He had wounded the house, but the wound felt less like a severing and more like a merging. He had not escaped. He had merely altered the terms of his absorption. He was still here, still Marcus, but also something more, something irrevocably changed. A curator of echoes, a living archive. The keystone of remembrance had cracked, but the repository of echoes had found a new, living vessel. He was part of the house now, and the house, in turn, was part of him.